All right, guys, we're going to look at developing your research question and selecting a primary source. So I've given you some notes handouts for this, but I know I've got a lot of people with questions, and so I'm going to take a few minutes and try to kind of hit some high points and give you some tips, okay? So we're going to look first at your primary source, okay? Your primary source should be a trunk, something to branch the rest of your research off of, something to anchor, connect it all together. Okay. When you're looking for available primary resources, it's always good to check the table of contents. You can get there like on Amazon on the look inside part. It's right above the picture of the book. Get to the table of contents, see how the book is separated into sections. If it gives you like chapter titles that have descriptions, that's excellent and really helpful as well, because you can kind of get a sense for some of the subtopics that may be covered in your book that you weren't aware of just based on the main title. Okay? You want to make sure your primary source is credible and that it is academically focused. You're writing an academic research paper, not a book report, and so you need to be able to use claims of value as well as facts from your primary source. Check the author, make sure they are credible. Look for someone who is an expert, a researcher in their field. Okay, this is usually pretty easy to tell. All you have to do is see who they are, right? You can Google them. Sometimes like on Amazon or something like that, if you scroll down, it'll say like about the author. If they're a college professor or university professor or professional researcher, then you're probably good to go. Okay. If it's somebody that's being paid for by like a political action committee, someone who is a former politician or something like that, where they're just kind of publishing a memoir of their own ideas, that's probably not going to be as credible. Self-published authors, bloggers, journalists, they don't really get a lot of editorial oversight, where a college professor has to have their research tested by other professors at the university and other experts in their field before it really is considered for publication. And so that's where you're going to want to try to go, is to get a resource that you can count on as being an accurate and credible input on whatever the topic or conversation that you're looking into is. Okay? And so finally, you want to make sure that your resource is accessible. If you see the price tag on your research book that you're looking at is like really high, okay, it's probably a textbook. Don't get it. Okay. Make sure that the book is still in print. If you find something that's really old, there's a chance that the publishers might not be printing new copies of it. Okay. And so you might be able to catch a used copy in that case, but it might be something that you can't find in order to order it. So make sure that if you're going to choose something as a primary source, that you can actually get a copy of it easily. Otherwise, you can't use it, right, as a source. So that again, be careful with your primary source. Make sure you get something that you can use. Okay, this is what I'm looking at when you turn this in. If I don't approve your primary source, it's because of one of these things. Either your author's not, exactly necessarily a credible source, or there's something, some other factor going along with the primary source that I think is going to make it really hard for you to use it. Okay, so the primary source, the whole goal, reason why it's so important to me that you get one that's really useful, is this is where you get your exigence. Okay, exigence is that thing we've talked about throughout the years, the motivation that a speaker has. You need motivation to respond. Okay, you're writing a research paper based on someone else's idea. It's a reaction, right? You need something that makes you react strongly enough that you want to write or say something about it. Okay, that you want to look into it more. And so you're either going to find something that bothers you within a certain issue, or you're going to find something that really excites you within a certain issue. That's generally how it works. You want something that's going to push you to gain that further inquiry, okay, in order to build a credible response. So let's take a look at the research question. So your research question should be a few things. It should represent a clear path for your research investigation. It should give you a clear path to go for when you're doing your research. It should be open-ended, and it should require inquiry into several angles or facets or lenses, some people call them. Okay? So I want to talk about each of those things. So what I mean when I say creating a clear path, okay, to your research. I don't want you to attempt to research something that is really easy to confirm or something that's obvious, okay? An example, does racial bias exist in the incarceration of people in the criminal justice system? Okay, this is something that you could pretty much confirm with statistics, okay? Is there an imbalance within the prison population based on race? Okay, yes, there is. Minorities are incarcerated at a much higher rate than non-minorities in this country. Okay, you could look up that data on your own. It's not really a research project. You confirm it and that's it. You'd have nothing else to say. Okay, and so instead I want you to take approach maybe where you're looking to propose a solution to a problem that you've seen, something that you have confirmed through some soft research. So maybe try to take this again, take the same topic, change the scope of the question, so you can hopefully see how it can be that open-ended thing that you need to be able to investigate with a clear path. Okay. In what ways can the criminal justice system change in order to reduce the potential for a racial double standard and the rate of incarceration? Okay, so if you've identified that there is a double standard or a seeming double standard based on the statistical data of prison population, okay, what ways can the criminal justice system change in order to balance that out? Okay, and so through research, now you have something to investigate. You can go look at the current issue to kind of confirm the problem, but then you can also, after you've confirmed the double standard, look into different avenues or different areas for potential solutions, okay, to that problem. Some things that you can find other people talking about that will try to make that situation better, okay? And you can bring all those ideas together, okay? So the next thing I want you to worry about is avoiding confirmation bias in your question. Okay, confirmation bias is where you've come up with an idea ahead of time, but then all your research would be to try to confirm the idea that you already believe. I want your question to be a real question that you have to figure out an answer for based on the research you find. It's just like when we write essays. I don't want you to make up your mind on the argument question before you've come up with examples. I want you to come up with those examples first, and then I want you to argue what those examples can show. Same thing with synthesis. Read the documents first, argue the answer that you can support with the documents you read. Okay? That's how you should approach research too. So it needs to be an open-ended question. Don't decide on a specific opinion before you've even started doing the research. Okay? For instance, if your question says something like, should the criminal justice system be restructured because of unjustly inflated representation by racial minorities in the prison population? Okay? If you've already decided that yes, it should be restructured, and you make a question like this so that you could just be like, yeah, it should be restructured, okay, then you're going to run out of stuff to say very quickly. And also, when you're doing research, you're only going to find research on one side of the issue pretty much, because in this particular case, no one is going to academically and reasonably argue that we should keep a system in place that is racially unjust, okay? Sure, you'll find, crack jobs on the internet that'll argue, for racist systems, but you're not going to find anybody who's academic and credible that is going to take up the other side of that argument that you can use in your research paper, okay? And so what you'll end up with is 5 or 6 sources that basically say exactly the same thing, and your paper is going to fall flat because you're going to repeat the same thing over and over and over again, okay? So instead, to try to make sure you keep that open mind, give yourself a question that's going to allow you to find reasonable sources, academic sources, on both sides of the issue, okay? For instance, what should be considered as a great prompt. It's used a lot in synthesis as well, so is propose a solution, okay? What should be considered to restructure criminal justice programs in order to reduce the unjustly inflated representation of racial minorities in the prison system, okay? Now you're looking at problems to fix, prison population as a whole, potentially, okay? Because the programs that you've put in place to help, minorities stay out of prison could also help anybody else stay out of prison potentially too. Now you're looking at the prison population as a whole, and you're looking at what should be considered to reduce the prison population, okay? And so you can go and find different various ways that it's called recidivism in the prison population, the rate at which people return to prison after their first, their first sentence. Education programs, you can look at economic factors, cultural factors, regulation of the criminal justice system, like legal factors involved, constitutional issues. You have a lot of different options now for things to consider, okay, without getting stuck on one side of the issue. All right. So those two are going to be really big in terms of making sure that your question gives you something to work with. Okay. And so the last part is all about giving you angles. Okay. You want to be able to look at this problem from several different viewpoints or perspectives, lenses, buckets is what I used to call them back in the day. And the buckets term comes from, when I was a student and most of my research was done on paper because they didn't have digital databases yet. We had internet, but we didn't have all of the knowledge of humankind digitized on it yet. Okay. And so most of the research that I had to do, was in a library with books, and I had to keep photocopies or handwritten notes for my sources. Okay. And so to not make a huge mess, some of my college research papers, I don't know, 25 or 30 sources. Okay. That's a lot to keep track of. And so to keep track of it and keep it separate and make sure that I was getting enough research in each area of the paper that I wanted to write, I would use these little sometimes I'd use box tops or buckets or whatever I could find, containers. Okay. I called them buckets, where I could keep my stuff. So like all my resources that I wanted to use in the section of my paper where I was going to talk about economics or something, I would put in one pile, one bucket. Okay. And so that's what this visual is about. Like if you're writing about immigration reform and, the areas that you want to look into more closely are, you want to look at economic issues within immigration reform. You want to look at cultural, like assimilation issues within immigration reform. And then you want to look at justice and security, like refugees versus just open immigration, or you want to look at, protecting, domestic communities from international terror or something like that. Those kind of like national security issues that people bring up in immigration, you can put that in like bucket 3. Okay. And so by doing this, you can make sure that you have, enough sources in each area so that when you go write the paper, you can have plenty of material to pull from in your body paragraphs, which is super important. Okay. Nobody likes to start writing a body paragraph and realize they don't have enough evidence. Okay. And so, again, when you're thinking of your research question, you want to make sure you give yourself something, like I did in the 2 examples that we just saw, where you could take the problem, from different perspectives. Okay. And so the question and the primary source is a big deal. Next week, we're moving straight into research. Okay. And so we need to make sure when you come in on Monday that we got you a really solid question, that we got you a really solid primary source, because I'm going to teach you on Monday how I want you to kind of set up research notes. In order to do that, it would work great if you already had some note cards or a legal pad. That's it looks like this. So legal pad is like the pad of paper that is bound at the top. Okay. So you can use a legal pad, or you can use the big note cards. So like these are 4x6 note cards, which are probably okay, but you want something a little bit bigger, I would say, because you want to be able to have more space to put stuff on there. I do encourage you to handwrite your notes for your research, because you can. We'll talk about it later, but anyways, it's easier to keep track of, and you can rearrange it much easier. I'll kind of get into it this week. So anyway, try to have those materials ready. And throughout the next 2 weeks when we're doing most of our research, it's going to be helpful if you're a face-to-face student if you bring your personal device with you. I have the computer lab scheduled for as many days as I could get it, but there will be some days that we're going to try to do research from my classroom. And so I would love for you to be able to use that time really effectively and get access to these databases and these other things so that you can get most of your research done here at school instead of trying to do it at midnight or whenever you have time to do it at home. Okay. Thanks a lot for watching, and can't wait to see you in class so we can start research next week.